The rain had stopped just as Margaret Ellis reached the old town library. She paused by the library's monument stone, running her fingers over the engraved year, 1892. The building stood like an old soul, holding centuries of whispers within its walls. Maggie hadn't been here in years. Retirement had given her time, but not purpose. When the Historical Society asked her to help restore the archives, she agreed before thinking twice. It wasn't work she missed. It was meaning. The librarian's key turned with a creak, unlocking the basement door that smelled of dust and time. The air below was cool, carrying the scent of forgotten stories. Maggie flicked on a single hanging bulb. The room blinked awake, revealing chaos. She smiled softly. Chaos, she knew, was just history waiting to be alphabetized. Hours passed quietly, the hum of the bulb and rustle of paper her only companions. Then, beneath newspapers from 1943, she noticed a hollowed-out book. Her breath caught. Inside were folded letters tied neatly with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was yellowed, fragile, ink faded but still legible. Maggie hesitated, the room suddenly quieter. June 14, 1944, it began. My dearest Helen, the rain fell all night on the deck of the ship. The words felt alive, echoing across decades. She read on. The soldier wrote of longing, of the fear of never coming home. His voice, though only ink, was tender. It reached something in her that hadn't stirred in years, and her eyes glistened. I dream of the scent of lilacs by your window, the letter said. Maggie smiled through the ache. No one wrote like that anymore. She turned the envelope over, no last name, just, to Helen. The postmark was from a naval base she vaguely remembered from childhood stories. Maggie felt the strangest pull, as if this letter had been waiting for her. She looked around, hundreds of boxes, thousands of stories. Why this one? She placed the letter on the table, lit a desk lamp, and opened the next one. July 2, 1944, it read. The ocean is endless, but I keep seeing your face in every wave. Maggie's heart tightened. Whoever he was, he loved this Helen deeply. The letters continued, poetic, desperate, full of hope. By the fifth letter, she was weeping quietly. The loneliness of his words mirrored her own. She whispered, "Who were you?" The letters ended abruptly in August 1944. No signature. No closure. She gathered the letters carefully, heart fluttering with questions. As she locked up the archive that night, she glanced back at the darkness below. Something deep inside whispered, this was only the beginning. And for the first time in years, Margaret Ellis didn't feel alone. The street was empty, the kind of quiet that follows revelations. Maggie tightened her grip on the book, feeling its weight, history, love, and longing folded inside. With every step toward home, she realized the letters were changing her. Quietly, irrevocably. She paused under a street lamp, letting the rain cool the warmth rising in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt accompanied. The soldier's words echoed in her mind. For the one who waits for me. She wondered who had waited, and whether they ever met again. A flash of lightning lit the sky, not harsh, just illuminating. Her house glowed ahead, warm and hopeful against the rain-dark world. She stepped onto the gravel path, pebbles crunching under soaked shoes. The rain softened to a hush, as though giving her permission to breathe again. She unlocked the door with a familiar click, home receiving her like an old friend. Inside, the air smelled faintly of books and chamomile, the scent of her quiet life. She set the book on her kitchen table, as gently as if setting down a fragile truth. The house listened, as though sensing the story she carried in with her. She removed her coat, rainwater dripping onto the mat in delicate beads. Her shoulders softened. The day had been heavy, but beautifully so. She returned to the table, drawn to the book like a magnet. Her fingers flipped over the page, reverent, hesitant, yearning for answers. She flipped the page again, and the past opened with it. The first letter she lifted felt heavier than paper should. She unfolded it, the soldier's handwriting emerging like a voice revived. Her breath steadied, as if preparing to cross a threshold into someone else's heart. The first line struck her deeply. My dearest Lenora. Maggie whispered the name, letting it linger in the air. Lenora, a woman she had never met, yet suddenly felt intimately connected to. She leaned back in her chair, absorbing the gravity of it all. Outside, the rain eased into a delicate patter, as if the world itself was waiting. She continued reading, and with every sentence, the soldier's devotion grew clearer. He wrote about sunsets over the Pacific, about longing, fear, and hope. She saw it, the way he must have leaned over the rail, pen trembling in his hand. The emotion in his words felt almost alive. She blinked slowly, overwhelmed by tenderness she had not expected tonight. She pressed a hand to her heart, steadying herself. This wasn't just history. It was a love kept breathing by ink and time. Maggie realized she was no longer just reading their story. She was entering it. And somehow, in the quiet of her kitchen, she felt them there. Two young hearts, calling across time. Maggie inhaled deeply and whispered, almost as if answering them. I'm listening. Maggie gathered the scattered letters into a neat pile, her hands steadier now, as though the past had finally granted her permission to breathe. She hesitated before lifting the next letter, feeling the weight of a story waiting to be heard. Outside, the wind quieted to a whisper, as if even the night leaned in to listen. She opened the envelope, and the faint scent of old ink drifted upward, carrying decades of waiting. The letter inside was shorter, its edges more worn, as if handled many times by uncertain hands. Maggie leaned forward, reading the soldier's words, each line revealing a man torn between duty and devotion. If I cannot return, he had written, know that my heart never once left you. Her breath caught. This was more than history, it was a last confession frozen in time. She pressed the letter gently against her chest, feeling emotion settle through her like warm embers. A faint smile touched her face, not of joy, but of understanding. She placed the letter beside the others, forming a quiet archive of love that had survived its own silence. Her gaze shifted to the old hardcover book, its ribbon bookmark frayed but steadfast. Carefully, she lifted the book again, sensing it was more than an object, it was a bridge. The room grew still, as if time recognized the importance of what she carried. She walked toward the living room, footsteps soft, thoughtful, almost ceremonial. Rain tapped gently at the windows, no longer mournful but companion-like. She sat on the edge of the couch, the book in her lap, feeling history settle beside her like an unseen guest. For a moment, she imagined the soldier and Lenora sitting across from her, smiling faintly at being remembered. She didn't speak aloud, but her heart whispered what she hoped they could hear, your story isn't lost. And with the rain easing into silence, part one of their story found a place to rest, finally held, finally seen. Maggie sat at the kitchen table long after the rain had stopped, the letters spread before her like a constellation she was only beginning to understand. Each page felt heavier now, not just with ink but with untold truth, something unfinished, something waiting. She sensed it in her chest. This was no ordinary forgotten love story. Something had been left behind for a reason. She reached for the next envelope, date smudged, name faint. The paper trembled slightly in her hands, not from age, but from the quiet realization that she had crossed a threshold. Whatever story lay in these pages was now intertwined with her own. A knock at the door startled her. Not loud, hesitant, almost accidental. She glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. Nobody ever visited her at this hour. She opened the door to find Mr. Harrow from 2 houses down, the quiet retired archivist she barely knew. Rain speckled his coat. He offered a thin, uneasy smile. Sorry for the hour, he said. But I saw your light. And I noticed you came home with a very old book. Maggie's breath caught. He stepped inside cautiously, eyes drifting toward the letters on the table. Something in his expression changed, recognition mixed with disbelief. I haven't seen those in decades. Maggie stared. You know these letters? Maggie watched Mr. Harrow stare at the table full of letters, his breath catching as if he'd stumbled into a memory he wasn't ready to meet again. His fingers rested deliberately upon the inscribed letters. Where did you find these? He asked, voice low, cautious. Mr. Harrow brushed a trembling hand across one envelope, touching it. I haven't seen this handwriting in decades. The room felt suspended, the air thick with unspoken memories. Maggie leaned in. Who were they, Mr. Harrow? Mr. Harrow slowly spoke, as if lowering himself into history. Lenora was my sister. A chill crept up Maggie's arms. She had never heard him speak of family. And the soldier? He exhaled, long and pained. Thomas Calder. The man she was going to marry. Before everything went wrong. Maggie's heartbeat quickened. The letters weren't just artifacts, they were pieces of a love story torn apart. What happened to them? She whispered. Mr. Harrow's eyes shifted away, as if the memory hurt to look at. No one knows for sure. Lenora disappeared first, then Thomas months later. Maggie felt the room tighten. Disappeared? Both of them. He nodded. And these letters? I thought they were lost forever. Burned, maybe. Destroyed. Maggie swallowed as a new thought took shape. Do you think the letters can tell us what really happened? Something flickered in Mr. Harrow's eyes. Fear or anticipation, she couldn't tell. If you read them, read carefully. There were things Lenora never said. Maggie drew in a steady breath, sensing this was only the beginning. Then we'll read them together, she said softly. Maggie sat across from Mr. Harrow, the old letters spread between them like fragile artifacts. The old man's gaze lingered on the looping 1940s script, his breath tightening as if confronting a memory he'd buried. Maggie felt the room shrink, thick with unspoken truth. He lifted one letter with trembling fingers, tracing the ink as though feeling an old wound. Maggie noticed the way his jaw tightened, the flicker of fear, longing, and guilt in his eyes. Something in these letters hurt him deeply, too deeply for a stranger. Maggie, you shouldn't have these, he whispered, voice cracking with panic. His reaction was sharper than she expected, almost protective, almost terrified. She leaned forward, her curiosity sharpening to suspicion. Why? She asked softly. Mr. Harrow didn't answer at first. Instead, he pressed the bridge of his nose, gathering himself. When he finally spoke, his voice shook. Because I knew them. Maggie's breath caught. The soldier and Lenora weren't just names to him, they were ghosts he once lived beside. Suddenly, the mystery widened, pulling her into a past she never imagined touching. Mr. Harrow slowly looked up, his green eyes glimmering with something old and wounded. They were real, he said. And their story didn't end the way people believed. Before Maggie could respond, a gust of wind rattled the windows. The moment felt heavy, as though the night itself was listening. She asked the question that hung between them, what happened to them? Mr. Harrow shook his head. Not here, he murmured. This isn't a story for warm rooms. His tone sent a chill down Maggie's spine. He reached for his coat, but paused, staring once more at the scattered letters. You opened a door, he said quietly. Be sure you're ready to walk through it. Maggie followed him to the porch, the air cold and sharp after the lingering rain. He stepped out into the quiet night, but before leaving, he turned back. Not everything that's forgotten should be found. She watched him disappear into the shadows, the words echoing through her chest. But curiosity had already taken root. She returned inside, gazing at the letters as if they now held answers, and threats. One envelope caught her eye, a different color, edges worn in a way the others weren't. She lifted it carefully, noticing faint initials pressed into the flap, LMH. Her heart beat faster. Lenora's initials. And the envelope had never been opened. The seal remained intact, fragile but whole. Why would an unopened letter from Lenora be hidden among the soldiers? The contradiction made her pulse thrum. She set it aside carefully, knowing it would change everything, but not yet. She spent the next hour rereading the letters, this time catching tiny details she'd missed, dates that didn't line up, events that seemed too carefully worded. Something in the story had been edited. Hidden. A cold realization settled over her. These weren't simply love letters. They were clues. A trail left behind by two people whose voices had been silenced. Thunder rumbled far away, though the storm had already passed. Maggie felt the weight of unseen eyes on her, as though the past itself had begun to stir. With a steady breath, she finally placed the unopened envelope at the center of the table. Tomorrow, she whispered. Tomorrow I open you. Maggie drew in a slow breath and reached for the lamp. When she clicked it off, the kitchen slipped into a hushed blue twilight. But the envelope on the table did not dim with the room. It seemed to hold its own quiet shimmer, as if memory itself were waiting for her to come closer. Maggie sat alone in the dim kitchen, listening to the faint hum of the night as though the house itself held its breath. The unopened envelope lay before her, silent, but impossibly heavy with promise. She whispered to herself, why did he react that way? Recalling the tremor in Mr. Harrow's voice when he said he knew them. A wind rattled the windowpane, as if something outside wanted in. She slowly opened another letter, the old crease lines whispering as though resisting time. The handwriting inside was different, firmer, more desperate, as if written during a storm at sea. Lenora, the letter read, if this reaches you, know that I tried. I truly tried to return. Maggie felt a chill crawl up her arms. This letter wasn't like the others. It hinted at danger. A soft knock broke the stillness. 3 gentle taps. Measured. Intentional. Her breath caught. Mr. Harrow? The door creaked open, revealing Mr. Harrow, soaked from the rain, face pale, shoulders trembling as if he'd run. You weren't supposed to read that one yet, he whispered. Maggie stepped aside, letting him in without a word. Something in his eyes told her this wasn't just memory, it was confession. He stood in the kitchen doorway, staring at the letters spread out like accusations. I never meant for anyone to see these again, he murmured, voice breaking at the edges. Maggie gestured him to sit. Tell me, please. He sat slowly, as though decades of guilt pressed on his spine. Lenora, he said softly. She wasn't just someone they wrote about. She was my sister. And the soldier, he paused, swallowing hard. The Navy declared him lost. But I never believed them. A crack of thunder rolled far across the hills, as though the past itself had woken. Maggie barely slept. The letters on her table felt less like artifacts and more like silent witnesses waiting to speak. She reached for the envelope that had glowed faintly the night before. Her fingers tingled as she touched it, as if the paper carried a heartbeat. She unfolded the soldier's letter, this one addressed only, to the one who finds this. Her breath caught. The handwriting was hurried, different, like it had been written in fear. A floorboard creaked. Maggie froze. Slowly she turned toward the hallway. No one was there. She read on. If she is gone, if Harrow hasn't told you, leave the letters where they lie. Someone still watches. Her stomach tightened. Mr. Harrow knew them. But this? This was a warning he hadn't mentioned. She pulled out the rest of the bundle. One letter was sealed in deep red wax, unbroken. Mr. Harrow's eyes fell on the sealed wax envelope. His jaw tightened. That one, he whispered, was never meant to be found. Not by anyone alive. Maggie swallowed. Mr. Harrow, what happened to Lenora? He closed his eyes. I didn't just know them. I failed them. The windows rattled as the storm drew closer, wind pressing against the old house like a restless hand. Harrow finally opened his eyes. If you break that seal, everything they ran from will return. Maggie felt a chill creep through her. The letters weren't simply memories. They were unfinished business, dangerous, alive, and now hers to confront. Maggie steadied her breath as she set the sealed envelope between them on the table. It felt heavier than paper should ever be, as if every truth it carried had waited decades for this exact moment. You need to understand, Harrow whispered, eyes on the envelope but mind far away. Lenora didn't just disappear. Someone made sure she did. Maggie's pulse thudded. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if walls themselves were listening. Harrow reached for the envelope but stopped short, fingers hovering over it like he feared it might burn him. She trusted the wrong man, he murmured. And he wasn't the soldier. Maggie felt a chill creep up her arms. Who was it? Harrow swallowed hard. Her fiancé. The man everyone thought she loved. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, marking the space between them like a countdown. Lenora tried to leave him, Harrow whispered. She planned to run away with the soldier. But she never made it. Maggie covered her mouth. The soldier's letters had never once hinted at fear, only hope. Harrow finally rested his fingertips on the envelope. This is why I came. You have what I never had, he said. Proof. Her voice. The house groaned under a push of wind. Maggie shivered but didn't look away. Harrow continued, voice breaking. I should have helped her. I should have said something. But fear is a cruel thing. The envelope seemed to pulse between them, a relic demanding to be opened. Maggie steadied her hand. We open it together. For the first time that morning, Harrow nodded without hesitation. The paper tore softly, a whisper from the past returning. Inside lay a single letter, folded crisp and thin, but with words that seemed to radiate urgency even before they were read. The envelope lay between them now, no longer just a relic, but a threshold. Maggie reached for it, then stopped. Some truths asked to be invited. Mr. Harrow swallowed hard. His silence carried decades. She knew, he whispered, before anyone else did. Maggie started reading the letter. If you are reading this, it began, then I was right to be afraid. Maggie felt the room tighten around them. Lenora wrote of names, of men who smiled too easily. She trusted only one person with the truth. Mr. Harrow closed his eyes. The past had found him. I should have listened, he said. I chose silence instead. The soldier's words followed Lenora's, like a warning that arrived too late. Do not trust them, he had written. Not even those closest. Maggie understood now. This story had been buried on purpose. Outside, the wind rose, as though the morning itself had been listening. They never found her, Harrow said, because they stopped looking. The room filled with the weight of a promise broken. Maggie folded the letter carefully, not to hide it, but to protect it. This was no longer a love story alone. It was a reckoning. The soldier wrote not of battle, but of fear. Of men back home who smiled in daylight and hid danger in shadows. He warned Lenora to leave town, to trust no one except the messenger who never came. Maggie felt the truth land heavy in her chest. Lenora hadn't been abandoned. She had been silenced. The soldier's final lines were hurried. He believed he wouldn't survive, but hoped Lenora might. He never returned from the sea. His warning died with him, until now. Mr. Harrow spoke at last. He had seen Lenora the night she left, afraid, carrying only a small suitcase. He hadn't stopped her. Fear kept him quiet. And silence became her sentence. Lenora left believing the soldier had forgotten her. And the soldier died believing she would never know the truth. Maggie sat with their story between her, love undone not by fate, but by fear. She knew what she had to do. She returned the letters to the archive, but not to be hidden. She documented every word, every truth, every name. Lenora's name was restored, no longer whispered, no longer erased. Mr. Harrow watched quietly. He didn't ask for forgiveness, only remembrance. That evening, Maggie walked home under clear skies. The weight she carried before was gone. What remained was purpose. Somewhere beyond memory, Lenora and the soldier were no longer waiting. Some loves are not meant to be lived, only remembered. And remembering is how we finally set them free.